This video is over factoring trinomials. So a trinomial, I need to point out, is three terms, and it takes the form ax squared plus bx plus c. So this is what we're going to be looking at in this section, is we're factoring a three-term polynomial that takes the form ax squared plus bx plus c, where a, b, and c are just numbers. Just numbers. A could be 2, B could be 6, C could be 0. It doesn't matter. A, B, and C are just numbers in a trinomial. So there are a few steps to going through and factoring. This is just a general factoring overview. We're specifically going to be looking at three terms in this section. But the first thing you always want to do when you're factoring is you want to factor out the greatest common factor. So if there's a GCF, pull it out first. That'll simplify your math, it'll simplify your numbers, it'll make your life a lot easier. And then once you factor out that GCF, once we get through this section, you want to determine the number of terms there are. If there's 3 terms, you'll want to do AC grouping. If there's 4 terms, you want to factor by grouping. And then if there are 2 terms, there's 2 methods you can take. There's either the difference of squares, or there's the difference of cubes, or the difference of cubes or the sum of cubes. Again, we'll talk about the 2 terms in a future section. Today we're just focusing on 3 terms. There are multiple ways to factor 3 terms. This is one of the multiple ways, AC grouping. You might have learned trial and error, you might have learned bottoms up method, you might have learned box method. I'm going to focus on using AC grouping. If you've learned factoring and are comfortable with it using another method, please feel free to use that method. I'm going to use AC grouping whenever I'm factoring 3 terms. So the steps to factoring a trinomial using AC grouping is you first want to identify your numbers a, b, and c. Once you identify your numbers a, b, and c, you multiply a and c and list the factors of that product. Remember, factors are 2 numbers that multiply to the given number. Then looking through all of those factors, you want to find the pair that add to b. You'll replace the middle term of your trinomial with the pair of factors that you identified in part C, and then you want to factor by grouping. Factor by grouping is what we learned about in the last section. So all these sections tie together very closely. Factor by grouping, again, here's the steps of how to do that, but we'll go through and we'll look at the process in more detail as we get to it. All right, so let's actually factor our first trinomial. So notice this is a trinomial because there's 3 terms. X squared is 1 term, 9x is the second term, and 20 is the third term. 3 terms that are broken up by plus or minus signs. So first thing we want to do here is always make sure it's in standard form, which it is. Standard form just means the exponents decrease from left to right. So there's an exponent of 2. There's technically an exponent of 1 there on the x, and then there's no exponent because there's no variable. So we identify the a, b, and c first. So a is the number in front of the squared term. So what number is in front of the squared term here? Again, there's technically nothing written, but we imply that it is a 1. Just like we don't put a 1 in front of the x, we don't put a 1 in front of the x squared. Our b, or the number in front of the x term, is 9. And then our c is the constant. The constant's just the number. Just the number here is 20. So I've done step 1 to AC grouping. Identify the a, b, and c. So next thing I want to do is I want to multiply a and c and list the factors. So a times c, we'll do it over here. A is 1, c is 20. 1 times 20 is 20. We want to go through now and list every set of numbers that multiply to 20. All right, so start off with the easy one. 1 times 20 gets me to 20. I also need to point out here, please don't forget about negative values. So we know -1 times -20 will get me to +20 as well. I again like to go in order here. I've done all the ones, so let's see if 2 divides into 20. Yeah, 2 times 10 is 20, which also means that I have -2 times -10, which gets me to 20. 3 does not evenly divide into 20, but 4 does. So I have 4 and 5, which means I also have -4 and -5. And then 5, I already have listed, so I'm kind of cycling up the back side. So these are all of my pairs of factors of 20. So I had listed all the pairs of factors like it told me to do in Part B. I multiplied A and C and I listed the factors. So next thing I need to do is I need to find a pair of factors that add to B. My B is 9, so I'm looking for which of these add to 9. So I'm going to put a little plus sign between each of these, and I'm going to see which of these add to 9. 1 plus 20 is 21. -1 plus -20, -21. 2 plus 10, 12. -2 plus -10, -12. 4 plus 5, 9. So here is my pair of factors that I'm going to use, 4 and 5. So I've identified my pair of factors. Now I need to replace the middle term with the pair of factors that add to B. So my middle term in my trinomial is the 9x. So I'm replacing that. So that means I'm rewriting that 9x now. The first term, the x squared, won't change. And the last term at the end there, the plus 20, won't change. But in between, I want to change that 9x to a 4x and a 5x. So 4 and 5, those were the factors I chose. So I'm writing 4 and 5. And notice there's an x after the 9, so I have to keep an x after them. And then now I have 4 terms. 4 terms, anytime you have 4 terms, factor by grouping. So that means group the first 2, group the last 2, find the GCF of the first 2. So again, if you can do this, I guess you could say the short way, feel free to. I'm going to do it this method. X squared is x times x. Again, technically there's a 1 there. I should put it in. And then 4x is 1 times 2 times 2 times x. And hopefully you see here that the GCF is x. So of my first 2 terms, I'm going to pull out the x. And what's left over, look at the stuff that's not highlighted. We have 1x, which is just x. And then 1 times 2, which is a positive 4. All right, now we go to the second part. We're looking for GCF here. So 5x. Again, if you can see the GCF and you can skip this part, feel free to skip it. This is a method that I use to make sure I have the greatest common factor, though. The prime factorization for 5x, 1 times 5 times x. And the prime factorization for 20, see here, 1 times 20. But 20 breaks into 4 and 5. and 4 breaks into 2 and 2. Again, always double check yourself here. 1 times 2 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 5 is 20. And then I look for what they have in common. They both have a 5 in common, so that's my greatest common factor. So I'm going to go ahead and pull out the greatest common factor of 5. In parentheses, I'll have 1x, which I can just write as x, and then 1 times 2, which is a positive 4. Then we look at the 2 here that I have together. Notice now, if you want to get really technical, we should put a plus sign between these two because I am adding the 2 here. I see a GCF between these two. I see the GCF now is x plus 4. So I'm able to factor out that x plus 4. And then once I factor it out, I have an x in the first part and a plus 5 in the second part. So my factored form, x squared plus 9x plus 20, my answer for this problem, when I factor it, will be x plus 4 times x plus 5. Again, one way to kind of go through and make sure you're right is you can check your answer by multiplying it out to make sure you get back to the first term, to get back to the original problem. So multiply these out using any method. I'm just going to use the horizontal method here. So x times x gives me x squared. Oh, darn. X times 5 gives me 5x. 4 times x gives me 4x. 4 times 5 gives me 20. And then combine your like terms in the middle here. 4x plus 5x becomes 9x, which is the original problem. So I know my factored form of the quantity x plus 4 times the quantity x plus 5 is my correct factored form.